Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, and experience from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm pleased to have a conversation with Parul Punjabi Jagdish. Parul, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Fritz. It's a joy to see you again.
Yeah. And Parul, let me introduce you to the audience briefly because we're going to talk about your awesome background. You started off your career as an analyst with Bain, a strategy and policy analyst. You're an independent filmmaker. You're currently the fellow at Salzburg Global and also the global head of impact at AIME. And specifically, the last part is something which very much interests me. AIME is an organization, an indigenous-led global systems change movement active in over 52 countries. This work has resulted in you getting the Youth Leadership Award from Sri Lanka, recognized as the top 100 leaders in education in the US, champion of the children's rights in Australia, and you've spoken around the world. So very much, you worked around the globe, you're getting global recognition. Again, welcome to having you on the program, Parul.
Awesome to be here.
As in my introduction, I presented you seemingly from my perspective, okay, a normal career, strategy consultant, but then it felt like it became more and more exotic over the years.
Yeah, one could say that for sure.
Yeah. Am I correct to assume that, or would you perceive that differently?
So it was traditional in the sense, it was conventional in the sense I bought into the rules of the system that were laid out before me, that this is what success looks like. And I followed the path, despite my life circumstances being slightly different and not necessarily me being the ideal candidate for a traditional career. I sort of almost beat the odds to get there and worked really hard to get there, only to realize that this vision of success that was sold to me actually did not bring me joy or make the world a better place. And something in me shifted. And then the period in between when I did policy work and then I worked as a filmmaker for an extended period. And then there was also a period that is not listed in my resume, but when I disappeared from the face of the earth and went into the mountains to retreat and connect with my own culture very deeply, sort of made me question really what my value is, why am I here on the planet, what kind of work do I do? So although the latter part of the work you call exotic, for me that is more suited and aligned to who I am as an individual and a human being on the planet. So,
got it. And you immediately dove in the deep end by discussing what does success mean to you, because you, I would say, initially start off in an environment where we would assume a more classic definition of success, generally accepted. You have to make a career, work for a good company. Something changed. That's what you're telling me.
Yes.
What changed? What was that? And how do you now define success?
So growing up, I have indigenous roots from mom's side to the center of India. Dad's from the northern part of India, and both of them were forcibly removed from their lands in the 40s and 50s for various reasons. And they unfortunately had to give up their lands, often language, lots of, really deep connections and move to a different part of the country. What it meant for me, fortunately, was that I grew up amidst like multiple language systems, knowledge systems, food systems, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And I was walking into that life, but I had had one really important foundational experience that shook my whole world, which was the passing of my dad when I was 10. My dad passed away. And that made me, even if I did not have the words to question it, I questioned life very deeply. And when I eventually got to work at Bain and was doing strategy consulting work, something in me went, no, this isn't for me. I'm making rich companies richer. I'm not necessarily making the world a better place. And I definitely am not feeling joyful. So why am I doing this with my limited time on the planet? And I think Dad's death sort of gave me that lens of, you know what, you're also going to die, as in me. I'm going to die and I have only a limited amount of time on this planet. So I should do the things that bring me joy and make the world a better place. Therein started my journey towards something else.
Okay. So I understand that. I would say moment. Would you call this an epiphany?
Yes.
Realization. So if you realize, okay, this is not for me, how do you then come from or go from where you were at the time to where you are right now?
So I think once the scales drop and you have a realization that this is not my path, it is still quite an uncertain journey to find your footing and find your path. And sometimes you have to stumble, you have to experiment. I don't know. Sometimes people feel when they're growing up, oh, I want to be a lawyer or I want to be a
Yeah.
doctor, and they commit their whole lives to it. And it's admirable. I find those people really wonderful. But I think increasingly in today's day and age, and more so in the future, with the advent of technology like never before, human life on the planet is being redefined very drastically. And a lot of us will have several careers and several pathways. So my way has been experimentation. Once I figured this is not for me, I wasn't like bitter about it. I was very grateful for the fact that I tried the corporate life and I know that is not for me. The question was, what is for me then? And I tried the policy work in Italy, which I loved mainly because of my colleagues. And I did that for an extended period of time, and it also sustained me and actually created some really meaningful change in the world, which I really enjoyed. But cinema was calling to my heart very deeply, and I chose to follow that passion. Ended up doing a master's in film in the UK. So it was still an experiment. I didn't know if that would pay off. But after I had thrown away the Bain career, which was the highest paying job in the country at the time,
Mhm.
mom was a little bit scared, but I was like, you know what? I want to be happy. I don't necessarily want to be successful. And in my happiness, success will come if it needs to. But my primary purpose is that. So when I geared myself towards my own joy, life sort of guided me to the right path. And I eventually ended up in Australia, meeting Jack, who you've interviewed previously about AIME
Yeah.
and the story of the founding of AIME, and fell in love with the work that was happening. And it's been an 8-year journey for me with AIME, and it shifted my world. And I
Mm.
feel very lucky that I get to change the world in very positive ways and do it with a bunch of people that are remarkable, really remarkable.
Before we go into AIM, just to check on something, did I just hear you say that for you, the definition of success is being happy?
So not necessarily happy, because sometimes people think happiness means you're always happy. That's not what I mean. So the definition of success, if I have to be very specific, is if I feel I am contributing to making the world a better place. I find a joy in that that is beyond my own personal happiness. And whilst doing this, turning the world into something better, if I'm not losing my own peace of mind, and if I'm not losing my own sense of joy, then, because sometimes people martyr themselves for a cause,
Yeah.
and I'm not for that. So I do think like finding your joy is very important, but it should not be a selfish joy that is limited to you. It should be a joy that uplifts the whole world and reaches out to every being.
Good. Hey, thank you for clarifying that. Moving on to AIM now. So, how did that happen?
How did the AIM journey happen?
Yes. And
It's
what does
funny.
AIM
I'm
stand for,
actually
by the way?
So AIM started 20 years ago, and if people are listening to my conversation with you and they haven't listened to Jack's conversation, it's well worth revisiting that conversation, because Jack did a really beautiful job of explaining the origin story of AIM. So AIM started 20 years ago as Australian Indigenous mentoring experience. Started a mentoring program from university to high school, became the largest such movement, became the largest university student movement, became the largest indigenous youth movement, was really well regarded, very successful, backed by the Prime Minister of Australia, loved by corporations and philanthropists, and the nation as a whole. So if you were to wear an AIM hoodie, like, it had recognition. People would randomly give you hugs and high fives and winks on the street. And you had this street credibility established through the work on the ground in communities throughout the continent of Australia. It was actually, I was here in this very place, in this beautiful little cottage in the Himalayan foothills where I am in retreat for this month. And this was probably 15 years ago when I was here. And I met a really good friend of mine. And in this phase where I was very deeply questioning the purpose of my own life and why I existed, I met this really important human in my life, a dear friend who was living in Australia. And he just gave me the question, why aren't you in Australia? Why don't you come see me? I'm like, okay, I've never thought of that side of the world. I lived in Europe, I lived in different parts of the world, but Australia I've not even thought of. And I said, okay, sure, I'll consider it. And then someone else sent a fellowship from the Australian government, which I applied and got to. And once I was in Australia, I knew very broadly the brushstroke story of Indigenous narrative in Australia, but I didn't know the particular details. And once I heard the particulars, I was really gutted and I wanted to do something meaningful. Then AIME came into my life because I was in this small town on a university campus doing some research on social ventures that had scaled. And I looked at a number of social ventures across Australian landscape that had scaled significantly. AIME was not the only one, but AIME was the one that captured my heart. And I started as a volunteer mentor supporting young students. But when I joined, the conversation with our founder, Jack, was, hey, this thing should be in other parts of the world. And Jack was like, we're talking to the board about the exact same thing about going global, not as a desire to expand the work or take over the world or what have you, but as a desire to, if we found the solution for something, you almost have a moral obligation to share it with the world, to share with others going through the same difficulties. And in that sharing of the world, like I started leading our global partnerships work initially, and then eventually, yeah, I've held many roles at AIME, but currently my role is leading our impact work. And that's quite a challenge as well. It's because sometimes people think it's true in our monetary systems for sure, but it's also true in the impact space more broadly. People think if you pin something down, put a label on it, put it statically in time and find its value, then it's valuable in the current system. But that's not how life works. Life is in continuous movement. And how do you show the impact of something shifting over extended period of time and being in continuous flow? So it's been quite a joyful, remarkable journey to see AIM from this homegrown Indigenous mentoring program to this global Indigenous-led systems change network around the world now.
Okay. Good personal journey. Curious. The global systems change. What is it today that you want to change, and how do you want to change it?
So there is, at the heart of AIM's work, is trying to understand what intelligence do we value? Like, what do our current systems value? What is valuable in the system? In our current system, I'm sitting underneath a tree, as you can see. This tree is not valuable alive, but if it is a timber table, it is valued in the current system. And we're saying, can there be an alternative economy which actually values life at its center? And the tree is valuable alive, at least more valuable alive than it is dead. A whale is more valuable alive than it is dead. So that is the heart of the problem AIM's trying to change. And within that heart of the problem, we've identified some sub-problems. AIM's theory of change is that, a lot of indigenous cultures around the world, including in Australia, including here in India, including in other parts of the world, have found ways of valuing nature and being in relation with nature that the current system lacks very dearly. This is why we have the climate crisis going on. This is why we have huge amounts of inequity in the world, and all the interlinked problems that cause the polycrisis.
Okay.
But to overcome that, our theory of change is we need to bring the knowledge, the intelligence that is already within these indigenous communities and other communities that have been marginalized from the mainstream. And if we can place that intelligence not at the back end or as a consultation just to tick mark, but as design principles that then inform the design of the mainstream system, maybe we can redesign our economic system. Maybe we can redesign the way we do education. Maybe we can redesign the way we do employment, so on and so forth. So it's a very broad, all of life network stack. But the very precise thing we're trying to change is the way we are networked. Because we think inequity exists, nature is excluded from the conversation and our boardrooms because a particular group of people, usually from a very particular type of training and background, are valued, and they make decisions on behalf of a nation, a corporation, what have you. And we're saying, how can you bring unlikely intelligences into those spaces where very different kinds of decisions start being made?
Got that. So this is story. This describes the system change you are trying to achieve and help organize. Question: A two-part question. First of all, why is it significant that it is indigenous led? And because I also see, I would say, people which might qualify as non-indigenous who are trying to achieve the same change. So, what's the relevance of the indigenous part in this discussion?
So the relevance of the indigenous part in this discussion is that, humans like evidence-backed stuff. We like research-backed stuff because there's a lot of experimental stuff going on in the world, which is necessary as well. And we are not opposed to non-indigenous led initiatives. AIME happens to be indigenous led, and for very good reason. It is also the longest running lab of humanity. This is where we've done the greatest amount of experiments to find ways of working. Indigenous people have survived ice ages. They've gone through periods of what may have been considered extinction events. And we've found a way of living through those crises. We've also found a way of living within the means of each bioregion in harmony, in manageable sizes and communities. So, with all those factors taken into play, I think this is, if we can trust MIT Media Labs to give us intelligence, which is probably as old as I am, then we can definitely trust a much larger source of intelligence that goes back 60,000, 100,000, 300,000 years of human existence on the planet. I would be backing that rather than something new and shiny.
Got it. So, how would you then, how do you view, I would say, the non-indigenous people in this equation?
The AIM's job is to be a bridge between indigenous, non-indigenous, between black and white, between the haves and have-nots, between the people of power and those without. So AIM's job is very much to be a bridge. We do not claim to be just for indigenous people.
Okay.
There is a particular theory of change, that there is an intelligence that the mainstream is lacking, and our job is to plug that intelligence at the start of the design of the mainstream systems. That is the indigenous angle into it. But we also offer systems change residencies to bring world-changing thought leaders, systems change workers from around the world to Australia. Most of them are non-indigenous. We've had people working on breakthrough ideas like capturing the energy of the sunlight without having to use cables, for instance, without having to dig for rare earth minerals. Kate Raworth of Donut Economics fame, who's a dear friend of AIM's and a friend of mine, she's one of our system change residents that'll hopefully join us next year or the year after. We had a Swiss banker join us. So we actually value a lot of non-indigenous led ideas, so long as they are all in service to life as a whole, so long as they have nature in the middle, so long as they're contributing to joy in the world. We back those ideas and we bring them and uplift them through the indigenous knowledges that we carry.
Got it. Now, I want to turn a little bit more about to your personal role and how you were shaped. One part you mentioned is okay, the passing of your father. Um, to what extent was he a role model at the time?
He was a huge role model, and he was also a central male figure in my life. I'm the youngest of three boys. And you have to understand, this is the 80s in India and 90s in India. Men were supposedly the sole breadwinners. Women were, it was almost frowned upon if women were working in the field. It's very different landscape now. South India is still more conservative and traditional. But anyhow, when dad passed away, mom actually took over dad's business, which is automobile spare parts, which she knew nothing about. And because it was frowned upon for a woman to lead a business like that, she built a cubicle with a one-way looking glass where she could see outside, but people couldn't see in. And she had a male employed as the storefront clerk guy.
Yeah.
And the customers interacted with the man. They did not know that a woman was running the show behind the scenes. Actually, mom's an even bigger role model to me than dad was, but he was a very important central figure. And if you lose someone like that early in your life, and I've noticed this in other people's journeys, if you lose a central figure in your life, then something in you shifts. Like the value systems start cracking, and the narrative that the system feeds you, even if you buy into it, as I did in the early stages of my life and career, at some point, the cracks will start showing. And if you're lucky and if you find yourself dissatisfied, which is the case with me, you will start asking deeper questions, and that'll lead you to some deeper truths that you did not even think were possible.
Wow. After outside your parents, are there other people or ideas or books which inspire you?
So I was very heavily influenced by Gandhi, for instance, in the Indian context.
Yeah.
Mandela as well, who was influenced by Gandhi, influenced me through his long walk to freedom. And I was reading a lot of these, and I used to question very deeply, India's independence journey, why we chose non-violence over violence. As a youngster, I had this burning, almost like not anger, but this burning desire to say, hey, we could have gotten independence 30 years ago if we fought with guns and bombs with bombs. But as someone who grappled with that question for a very long period of time, I came to understand had we chosen violence, we would have created a scar within ourselves that would have taken a very long time to heal. But because we chose the path of non-violence, we could forgive the oppressor really quickly. And it did not leave a scar within our consciousness. So that was very influential for me as a youngster. But then, I'm also inspired by Italian filmmakers, and there's this Russian filmmaker called Tarkovsky that actually inspired me to study and work in cinema. And he said, when you connect with any creative activity, you're connecting with the original creative impulse that created you in the first instance. You're almost connecting to the source of your own creation when you engage in creative work. And he almost took cinema to such spiritual heights that it almost compelled me to get into that field. And through cinema, strangely enough, I found my own spiritual roots. I found my own cultural roots. And that's when I found this place where I am now, where I got really deeply embedded in my own cultural protocols and knowledges. So cinema was a doorway, and that opened up a whole universe to me that I did not know was possible before then.
Wow. And what kind of films did you make? What did they
All
cover?
the films I made were very existential because that was the journey I was on at the point. I toured the festival circuit, going around the world
Yeah.
carrying these films, which were why are we here on the earth? How do we, one of the films was about this lush mansion and garden in Victorian England that had been taken over by this cultural institution, and they still kept the house and garden as they were. But the question for me was like, how do we understand a place like this? How do we understand a garden? And through that understanding, how do we understand ourselves as humans? So these were very deep questions I was holding. And you might say I gave up my film career, but funnily enough, with AIME, you never give up anything because we've just launched a feature film, and that
Yeah.
film is coming out in a big way with a cinematic release in Australia on Jan 26th, and then a global cinematic release in April and June. So watch out for that film as well.
Oh, definitely. Um, well, you've alluded that it hasn't been a smooth ride. You had some significant changes. Um, I want to explore both. First of all, what are the are there key milestones in your life other than the passing of your father, which you already covered, which hey, that actually helped me identify or find a new path for myself?
The other key big milestone in my life was actually coming to this place where I am now in the Himalayan foothills and connecting very deeply with the cultural knowledge holders from my own tradition and trying to even understand the depth of my own culture and roots. Because, you sometimes forget that in the chase for material life and Western sort of ideals that are placed upon India. And when you start questioning, okay, what are my roots? Why am I this way? Why do I grow up in such a way? And this place actually gave me the deep cultural context and container to look at my own life, my own culture. And then I tell you, like the way I describe it now, when I came into this retreat space and I spent 2 months in the first instance, it was still the same person walking in and out. It was still me, but it was almost like a mirror image of me. My whole value system was flipped inside out. I knew my life was to be a life of service. No matter what I did, had to be not just for my happiness, but for the happiness of the world. And if I didn't do that, then I should just be quiet and, retreat in a mountain cave or something. But so long as I'm active and contributing in the world, then it has to be for the upliftment of the world. And my life is in service to all beings, not just human, but also other more than human species. And I love the underwater world. So that was a huge milestone for me coming here to this particular place. And I'm lucky to be here now as we're having this conversation seated under this beautiful tree.
Hmm. Parul, love that. Now, as mentioned, coming back to AIME, in the name is also a lot of mentoring. How many people do you mentor on average yourself?
So I would have mentored in the last 8 years collectively a couple of thousand young people directly. But
Wow.
then AIMS network, we have mentored over 25,000 young Indigenous people in Australia alone, and then in other parts of the world, many thousand more. We've also unlocked a volunteer movement of mentors of 10,000 plus people who have given their time to us through AIMS work. But beyond the mentoring, we also like mentor these system change leaders now at a systemic level by connecting them to Indigenous knowledge keepers in Australia. So the mentoring has taken a new shape and form beyond the high school to university mentoring,
Yeah.
which is how AIM started. And now it's almost like mentoring at a systemic level. But beyond the mentoring, I also want to mention that there are two other circles of impact because I look at our impact. Mentoring is one big circle. The other two big circles are imagination and custodianship. Are we making the world more imaginative? And we speak of a very grounded sort of imagination. You know, sometimes people use imagination for nefarious means. You can tell a story and incite masses. But we use imagination that comes from the land, that has like nature at the heart of it, and keeps us grounded as we imagine different realities. And that also allows you to question the current systems without losing your sanity. So that's one big chunk of our impact beyond mentoring is imagination. And the last one is custodianship. And this is where I think Indigenous, non-Indigenous, it doesn't matter. We all, as humans on the planet, are meant to look after the natural environments we are a part of. We're not separate from this, but as humans, all Indigenous cultures know this fact, and almost all Western cultures do know this fact, but they would not live as per it. But the idea is very simple that you're meant to be a custodian. What a honeybee can do, I cannot do. What a tree can do in the ecosystem, I cannot do. But equally, what a human can do in an ecosystem, a tree or a honeybee or a whale cannot do as well. So I have a particular, we as a species have a particular ecological niche to perform. And that niche we call custodianship, being custodians of the landscapes and waterways and airways that we live in.
Got it. What would your advice be to young people starting their career at the moment, starting their journey through life?
I would say if you are unhappy, if you are not finding the joy doing what you're doing, please consider switching. I know it's tricky and you're almost afraid, and the systems tell you just stay where you are. You're going to be successful. Just keep at it, keep at it, keep at it. I'm not a proponent of that theory at all because I know that doesn't work. So I will say find your joy, make mistakes, fall. Like that's how we learn anything. That's how you and I learn to walk. That's how your audience learned to walk. That's how we learned how to ride a bike. That's how we learned how to swim. That's how we learned how to speak. That's how you're going to learn how to find meaningful work in the world that brings you joy and brings the world joy.
Sounds easy. I know it's not.
It's not.
So, how can you motivate people to keep on pushing it?
Yeah, and I'm not even saying keep on pushing it because sometimes keep on pushing it means, even if you're unhappy, keep doing it, keep pushing through that. That's not my theory, at least. My theory is okay, there are moments of discomfort you have to take. Otherwise, you do not grow. It's almost like a seed is buried underground, and unless the seed cracks, and the cracking is very painful. And even after the seed is cracked open, it's seeking light. It doesn't know if the sapling will find the light. It's seeking upwards. So there is a period of seeking and not knowing and lots of discomfort. So I'm not saying avoid discomfort, but in your heart of hearts when this place or this group or this organization or this movement or this network is not for you. And if you know that, then find the courage to walk away, no matter how lucrative the salary or the career path or what the system tells you. Sometimes you just have to back yourself. And I think in the world we are living in today and the world we're going to live in 10 years from now, with the increasing speed of AI development and so on and so forth, I think more of us will have to ask very deeply what makes me who I am, what makes us as a species uniquely human, and how do we serve the world in this ever-changing context. And change is going to be very, very normal for generations to come.
Hey, Parul, wise words. Last question for you, if I may. How do you want to be remembered over time?
Gee, that's a great question. It's almost like, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? Is the question I'm hearing. And I'd say I'd like people to remember a loving, friendly soul that wanted the best for them, that was easy to work with. I'm very easy to say sorry to, even if it's not my mistake. I try not to hold any grudges. I try to move with peace in my heart in the world. I hope you've experienced that in our brief encounters. So that is how I want to be remembered, is someone who lived life fully trusted, lived fearlessly, was not afraid of making mistakes. And, whatever work we do, I'm not one to say that I should be remembered just by my works. For me, with the spiritual roots and culture I've grown up in, the work we do is almost like building a little sandcastle on the beach. It's beautiful as long as it lasts. But then, the waves will come and take it away sooner or later. It might be after our death that the work we do will vanish at some point. But if we are like children, we will laugh and find joy in the sandcastle being washed away. And if we get stuck up like adults in the system, then we will start crying when we lose these things that are valuable to us. So that's how I want to be remembered.
Parul, I'm going to remember a great conversation I just had with you. Parul, I'm going to thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Parul Punjabi Jagdish. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fritz. Can I add one finishing thought, especially with AIME? Because there's a few things that are going through in the current climate at AIME, as you know,
Yeah.
which I don't necessarily want to share with the network. Like, we've had a 20-year history, we've had many highs and lows, we've had periods of expansion, periods of contraction. And now at this point, we're in this journey where we've built this relational network, which Jack speaks to quite a bit in his interview with you. So I again refer people to that. But if you lead an organization, and if you've listened to my interview, you would have found this common thread of joy being there and finding your joy. And if you are an organization that wants to shift your organizational structures to be more joyful for your people, hit me up and let's have a conversation, because we want more people to have joy in their workplaces in particular. And within the network we've designed, there's one particular stream called Joy Corporation. And we want people to be joyful and we want organizations to be impactful in the world. So if we can do that, that would be another way in the little sandcastle of work that I leave the world with, that would be a great gift to leave the world.
Hey, that's an additional extra gift you've given the audience. Again, Parul, thank you, and also sharing with us that last offer. Thank you again.
Thanks, Fritz. It's a joy.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.